have happened since World War II. It's helpful to think of the U.S. economy as like a bank. We control the master currency, the dollar, which is basically the master currency for the world economy. And so basically how the American economy works is that we borrow low, we borrow cheaply. And this is like the debt we have. You know, everyone goes, oh my gosh, we owe so much money to China and all these other countries. But actually, it's actually a relatively good model. We make actually a lot of money off by having debt, because we sell our public and our private debt abroad. We sell our, treasury bonds or commercial paper, and it's been bought up by foreign investors for reasons I'll get to later. And we only pay maybe like 2-3%, less than that today. And then we lend this money out. We take our dollars and we buy equity. We buy ownership in foreign businesses, and the return, if you think of the average stock return for money invested in a developing economy or China, is much higher than the 2 or 3% we're borrowing. So it actually is a pretty shrewd model. We borrow money at 2 or 3% and we lend it at 7%. And that means there's like 4 or 5% in the middle that we can pocket. And we pocket that difference, and that's what makes the American economy grow, at least since World War II. But why would people let us do this? Well, basically, from 1914 to 1945, the Americans benefited because Europe and all the rest of the world that they controlled decided to go and fight a really expensive and destructive war. And so by 1946, 80% of the world's gold, which was the basic form of currency at the time, that was what was underlying all the purchasing power and money. So we had 26 billion of the $33 billion of gold in the world was in the United States. And the entire rest of the world had the remaining 7 billion. Now, it was like we're in the Kula Ring and we're this island, and guess what? All the seashells and all the armbands and all the necklaces, guess what, are on our island? And we were like sitting on a big pile of seashells and necklaces. So the United States went from being basically a producer nation where we had commodities, which we converted into money so we could buy other commodities, into an MCM economy. We had a lot of money, or a lot of seashells, which you had to convert into commodities to make more money. And this led to a lot of things we did in the post-war period, because if we just sit on the world's gold, the world's seashells, and we just kind of like take our toys and don't play, the world economy is going to, let's say, seize up. And so instead of letting that happen, mostly because we learned about what happened in the wake of World War I, when the Allies did this to Germany, is that we rebuilt all these countries. We rebuilt Japan. We had the Marshall Plan, which sent a lot of money. It wasn't a charity mission. We were sending capital and trying to recapitalize Europe so that they could produce things and buy our products and then sell things cheaply to us. We had the Bretton Woods system that pegged the dollar to gold, which allowed most of our trading partners to, let's say, really take advantage, because we had a lot of purchasing power, but it made German and Japanese and other countries' goods very cheap, and they could sell them to us. We had these foreign military bases, which is a way of spending our money in foreign countries. That's the reason why you want to have long-term foreign military bases. Above and beyond the security reasons, having these foreign military bases was a way of recycling American dollars into foreign currencies, then redistributing the necklaces throughout the system. And another thing is that this led to a lot of American consumerism in debt. We had to spend this money. We had to buy stuff, because if we were just sitting on the gold and not doing very much about it, we needed to be able to buy stuff from the rest of the world, and that meant we had to spend out our gold or our money hoard. So a lot of things that we see as cultural, like Americans buy stuff and trinkets and whatever, we had to do that. In many ways, we had to take on debt. We had to be consumerist. Because if we weren't, the world economy wouldn't function as well. And so a lot of things that we did in the post-war period that we explained to security reasons and communism and ideology and charity actually had a lot to do with the functioning of the world economy. But this had pretty deleterious effects on the American domestic economy, because the United States being a bank is very good if you're a banker or if you own stock. Some people really benefit from this because the dollar being the strongest currency allows us to do things that we couldn't do in other ways. But if you actually made things, if you were working in Detroit and making cars, it made your products really, really expensive and uncompetitive in the world market. And so what you saw was the growth of the financial sector, and you saw as the withering of the industrial sector. And so you had financialization and deindustrialization. And so you have these things where one part of the economy is very dynamic and strong, Wall Street, financial institutions, etc., and the manufacturing base of the American economy withering away basically since little by little since World War II. Now, another way to think about this is the current situation. And this is what's called a Swan diagram after the Australian economist Trevor Swan. And what this basically shows is that there's 4 different types of unhappiness economically if you combine the internal and the external picture. So internally you could have unemployment, which means you have an under use of resources, whether it's labor, capital, etc. Or you can have inflation, which means you have more demand than supply, you have rising prices. So that's one way to think about, aggregate demand. Should the government be spending money, or should the government be cutting back? And the other thing is the international or current account balance, you could say the trade balance. And you could either be in surplus or deficit. You're in surplus if you're exporting more than you're importing. You're in deficit if you're in deficit if you're importing more than you're exporting. You're in surplus if you're exporting more than you're importing. I'm not sure if I said that correctly, but basically deficit means you're running a trade deficit. A surplus means you're running a trade surplus. Now, if you think about it, here are some 4 countries in different zones of economic unhappiness. And from this, you can decide about how you should react to, let's say, the current situation. So, for example, the United States here, we have relatively high unemployment, and we have a trade deficit. We buy more stuff than we import a lot more stuff than we export. Parallel to us, you have a country like China right now, which has relatively high inflation, but is running, which has like a trade surplus. They export a lot more than they import. You have a country like Japan, which used to be kind of where China was, but it now has, it still runs a trade surplus, at least with the United States, but it is having a relatively high, at least high for Japan, level of unemployment. And then you have countries like Greece that have rapidly escalating costs because they're tied to the euro, and they also have, let's say, relatively high unemployment. Now, there's different, let's say, reactions. So if you're up where the United States is, in this upper left-hand corner, you want to devalue your currency, and you want to increase government spending. Now, what I have up in the upper left-hand corner is kind of showing our exchange rate stability, which is the value of our currency, the level of trade, financial integration, our reserves, and fiscal policy and monetary policy, our ability to prop up or to cool down our economy. Now, this is Latin America here, but this is basically the same story as what the United States is, except that the United States has dollars and Latin America does not, which gives it a little more flexibility. We have a country like China, and what China probably should be doing is cutting back on government expenditures to control inflation, and also increasing the value of its currency. And so here's, you can see in the right-hand corner, a measure of how China's balances have changed over time. In Greece, you have a situation where what they should be doing is cutting back on their size of their public sector because the government is clearly overspent and is pumping excess demand in the economy. And they should be, just like the United States, devaluing their currency. But the problem is they can't, because the Greeks don't have their own currency. they share a currency with a lot of other European nations, the euro. And so guess what? They can't follow devaluation, and what they're going to do instead is going to have to cut back and induce a lot of domestic pain, at least as long as it's on the euro system. And so they have a different way of adjusting. And Japan should probably increase the value of the yen and also have a lot more government spending, because everyone really wants to get back to where these lines cross in the middle. That's where everything is in balance. Inflation and unemployment, and the trade deficit, imports and exports are basically in balance. Not every country should do the same thing. So what China is doing is not a good recipe for the United States and vice versa. So everyone should be doing something like this to kind of get back into the center. So I'll just do that again. If you see here, all countries should be trying to move to the middle. The perverse situation that we have now is that actually what everyone is doing is something like this. Everyone is moving farther out. So in the United States, people are talking about cutting the federal budget, which would be, let's say, reducing aggregate demand, and instead of devaluing the currency, everyone's trying to send messages that we have to keep the dollar strong and increase confidence in the American currency, when we really should be encouraging devaluing it to help us get back into a better situation. China has inflation and is running a trade surplus, so it should be increasing the value of its currency, and it should be, let's say, cutting back its government spending instead of propping up the economy and their housing market. But in fact, what they're doing is they're trying to shift it off. Now the other part of this is that if everyone coordinated, we could all help each other get back to the middle, because the United States devaluing its currency also helps China increase the value of its currency. So American devaluation is really the same thing as Chinese appreciation of their currency. And also we have the, if I cut back on, if I, let's say, increase the fiscal deficit, increase the demand of my economy, or someone else decreases theirs in their economy, that could help us out too. But the problem is, instead of cooperating, what we have going on is something a little bit like this, which is that if zombies are chasing you, I'm tripping you. And this is a little bit what we have going on in the international economy right now. We have, so in the spring of this year, we fed Greece to the zombies, hoping that they would eat Greece and the zombies wouldn't come after us. And right now we're basically feeding Ireland to the zombies. And this is what we call in economics beggar thy neighbor policy. The problem is that this logic that if we feed someone else to the zombies, they'll get gorged, stuffed on someone else, and they won't come after us. But the problem with zombies is that the more people you feed to them, the more zombies they are, and they just come after you. And so what's really happening, you can see in the world economy at the moment, is that we're throwing other people under the bus, essentially. Greece, Ireland, maybe Portugal, then Spain. But the problem is not fixing itself, the problem is growing. And so this is actually what happened in the early 1930s after the stock market crash in 1929 that led to the Great Depression. It'll come after one country after another, and the problem will just grow, because the more people we trip and feed to the zombies, the more zombies are, and they're going to keep coming after us. And so I'm just going to end the lecture here, and next time